Before we begin this incredible true story, please subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon so you never miss amazing stories like this one. Now, let's dive into a tale that will leave you speechless. The rain hammered against the windows of the royal palace as Marcus Chen stood at his post outside the Grand Library. He had been a member of the Royal Guard for 12 years, and all that time, nobody had ever noticed anything special about him. He was just another face in the uniform, another silent protector who blended into the marble walls and golden fixtures of the palace. But Marcus carried a secret that would soon shake the very foundation of the kingdom. Inside the library, King Edward sat hunched over an ancient chessboard, his face drawn with worry. The kingdom of Aldoria was facing its greatest crisis in centuries. The neighboring nation of Valthor had issued an ultimatum that would arrive in exactly 7 days. Either Aldoria would surrender half its territory, or war would consume them both. The king had consulted with every advisor, every military strategist, and every diplomat in the realm. None could find a solution that would not end in bloodshed or humiliation. The chessboard before him was not just any board. It was a legendary artifact passed down through generations of Aldorian rulers. According to ancient texts, the board had once belonged to a great strategist who had saved the kingdom 500 years ago. The pieces were carved from rare stones, each one a work of art. But more importantly, the board was said to hold secrets that only the worthy could decipher. King Edward had been studying the board for 3 days straight, barely sleeping or eating. His advisors had urged him to rest, but he refused. Somewhere in the patterns of this board, in the arrangement of pieces and the history it represented, there had to be an answer. The old texts spoke of a hidden move, a strategy so brilliant that it could change everything without a single sword being drawn. Marcus stood outside the door, listening to the king's frustrated sighs. He had heard the whispers throughout the palace. Everyone knew the kingdom was on the brink of disaster. The servants spoke in hushed tones about packing their belongings. The nobles were already making plans to flee to distant relatives in safer lands. Even some of the guards had begun to discuss desertion. But Marcus remained calm. He had been waiting for this moment his entire life. You see, Marcus was not just a guard. He was the last descendant of General Wei Chen, the very strategist who had created the legendary chessboard. His family had guarded a secret for 5 centuries, passing it down from parent to child in whispered conversations and coded letters. They had known that one day the kingdom would face another impossible situation, and when that day came, their knowledge would be needed. Marcus's grandfather had told him the story when he was just 10 years old. "Our family was once great," the old man had said, his eyes distant with memory. "General Wei saved the kingdom with nothing but his mind and a chessboard. But when the crisis passed, the nobles grew jealous of his influence. They pushed our family aside, took credit for his strategies, and reduced us to common soldiers. Yet they kept his chessboard, never understanding its true power." The secret had eaten at Marcus for years. He had watched incompetent nobles make decisions that hurt the common people. He had seen corruption and waste while families starved in the outer provinces. He had bitten his tongue as fools, wearing crowns made choices that a child could see were wrong. But his grandfather had made him promise to wait, to serve with honor, to trust that the right moment would come. That moment was now. Through the door, Marcus heard the king slam his fist on the table. "It's useless," King Edward shouted to no one in particular. "I've studied every game, every strategy, every historical battle recorded in our archives. There is no way out of this trap that doesn't end in disaster." Marcus took a deep breath. His heart pounded so hard he thought it might burst through his chest. For 12 years, he had been invisible, ignored, treated as nothing more than furniture and uniform. What he was about to do could cost him his life. Guards did not speak unless spoken to. They certainly did not offer advice to kings. He could be thrown in the dungeon for his presumption, or worse. But the alternative was watching his kingdom fall because he was too afraid to act. Marcus knocked on the door. 3 firm, clear knocks that echoed through the hallway. The king's voice came back sharp with irritation. "I said I was not to be disturbed." Marcus knocked again. His hand trembled slightly, but his resolve did not waver. Heavy footsteps approached the door. It swung open violently, and King Edward stood there, his face red with anger, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded. "I gave explicit orders that... He stopped. He had been about to continue his tirade, but something in Marcus's expression made him pause. The guard's face was calm, almost serene, but his eyes held an intensity that caught the king off guard. "Your Majesty," Marcus said quietly, his voice steady despite his racing heart, "I know the hidden move." The king stared at him as if he had spoken in a foreign language. "What did you say?" Marcus met his gaze directly, something no guard had ever dared to do. "The chessboard in your library? The legendary strategy that saved Aldoria 5 centuries ago? I know the hidden move that everyone has been searching for. The one that can save us now." For a long moment, King Edward said nothing. He studied Marcus's face, looking for signs of madness or mockery. But he saw only sincerity and something else, something that looked almost like destiny. "Come inside," the king finally said, stepping back from the door. "And this had better not be a waste of my time." Marcus walked into the library, and with that single step, everything began to change. The library was magnificent, with towering shelves filled with thousands of books reaching up to a ceiling painted with scenes of historical victories. But Marcus barely noticed the grandeur around him. His eyes were fixed on the ancient chessboard sitting on the king's desk. Illuminated by candlelight that made the stone pieces seem to glow with an inner fire, King Edward gestured toward the board with a mixture of skepticism and desperate hope. "Well then, guard, show me this hidden move you claim to know." Marcus approached the desk slowly, his mind racing through generations of carefully preserved knowledge. He looked at the current position of the pieces exactly as they had been arranged in the historical game from 5 centuries ago. The white pieces, representing Aldoria, seemed hopelessly trapped. The black pieces, representing the invading army of that ancient time, had them surrounded on all sides. "Your Majesty," Marcus began, his voice growing stronger with each word, "everyone who has studied this board has made the same mistake. They look at it as a record of a battle. But General Wei Chen, my ancestor, did not use this board to plan a battle at all." The king's eyebrows rose. "Your ancestor?" Marcus nodded. "I am the great-grandson of the man who created this board and saved Aldoria 500 years ago. My family has protected his secret through every generation, waiting for the day when it would be needed again." King Edward sank into his chair, his anger replaced by curiosity. "Go on," Marcus pointed to the white queen piece, positioned in what appeared to be a defensive position near the king. "Everyone assumes this queen represents military might. They see her placement and think General Wei was planning to defend the castle with his army, while sending smaller forces to harass the enemy. But that was not his strategy at all." "Then what was it?" the king asked, leaning forward. Marcus carefully lifted the white queen from the board. Beneath it, carved into the wooden square where it had rested, was a tiny symbol that had been hidden for centuries. "This queen does not represent soldiers, Your Majesty. She represents commerce." The king looked confused. "Commerce? We are facing invasion, not negotiating trade agreements." "That is exactly what everyone thinks," Marcus replied, his excitement building. "And that is why the strategy works. 500 years ago, when the kingdom of Nordheim threatened to invade, everyone prepared for war. They stockpiled weapons, trained soldiers, and built defenses. But General Wei saw something different. He saw that Nordheim's army was funded by a powerful merchant guild that controlled all the trade routes in their region." Marcus began to pace, his years of silent observation suddenly pouring out in a flood of words. General Wei did not fight Nordheim's army. He undermined their economy. He used the queen, the most powerful piece on the board, not for attack or defense, but for something no one expected. He sent secret envoys to competing merchant guilds in neighboring kingdoms, offering them exclusive trade agreements with Aldoria if they would refuse to do business with Nordheim's merchants. The king's eyes widened as understanding began to dawn. He cut off their funding. Exactly, Marcus confirmed, returning to the board. Within 3 months, Nordheim's merchant guild was bankrupt. Without money to pay soldiers or buy supplies, their army could not maintain its fighting strength. The invasion collapsed not because of a battle, but because of economics. No blood was shed. No cities were burned. The threat simply evaporated because the enemy could no longer afford to be a threat. King Edward stood up so quickly his chair fell backward. He stared at the chessboard with new eyes, his mind already racing ahead to modern applications. "Valthor," he whispered. "Their ultimatum is not backed by their military strength. It is backed by the Crimson Trading Company." Marcus felt a surge of relief. The king was seeing it. "Yes, Your Majesty. I have spent my years as a guard listening, watching, and learning. The Crimson Trading Company controls 70% of Valthor's economy. They are the ones who want our territory because it has direct access to the southern shipping lanes. If Valthor acquires our land, the company's profits would triple." The king began pacing now, his exhaustion forgotten as new energy coursed through him. "But if we could offer those shipping lanes to their competitors, if we could make it more profitable for other companies to oppose the Crimson Company's plans, then Valthor's government would face internal pressure to withdraw the ultimatum," Marcus finished. "Their own citizens would demand it because their economy would suffer if the trade war escalated." For several minutes, King Edward said nothing. He studied the chessboard, then looked at Marcus, then back at the board. Finally, he spoke in a voice filled with wonder. "Why did your family not come forward with this knowledge before? Why did General Wei allow his strategy to be forgotten?" Marcus's expression darkened. "He did not allow it to be forgotten, Your Majesty. It was taken from him. After he saved the kingdom, the noble houses grew jealous of his influence. They could not understand how a common man with no title could be so important. So they stole credit for his work, claimed the strategies were divine inspiration given to the royal family, and pushed my family into obscurity. General Wei was given a minor position in the palace guard as a token honor, and his descendants were told to be grateful for the privilege of serving. The king had the grace to look ashamed. I cannot undo the wrongs of my ancestors, but I can ensure that this wrong at least is made right." Akka shook his head. "I do not seek rewards, Your Majesty. I seek only to save my kingdom. My grandfather made me promise that when the time came, I would act not for personal gain, but for the good of all. That promise is more important to me than any title or wealth you could offer." King Edward studied the young guard with new respect. "Nevertheless, you will be heard. Starting now, you are my chief strategic advisor. We have 7 days to implement this plan, and I will need your knowledge of how General Wei executed his strategy." "There is more to learn from the board," Marcus said, returning his attention to the ancient artifact. Each piece represents a different element of the strategy. The knight here, he pointed to a white knight positioned near the edge of the board, represents speed and surprise. General Wei sent his fastest messengers to competing guilds before anyone knew what he was planning. By the time Nordheim discovered what was happening, agreements were already signed and trade routes had shifted. The king called for his secretary, a sharp-minded woman named Eleanor who had served the crown for 20 years. When she entered and saw a guard standing beside the king discussing strategy, she looked shocked. But King Edward quickly explained the situation, and Eleanor's expression changed from surprise to fierce determination. "We need a list of every major trading company that competes with the Crimson Trading Company," the king instructed. "Every guild, every merchant house, every shipping concern that has ever lost business because of their monopoly, we need it within 2 hours." Eleanor nodded and rushed from the room. King Edward turned back to Marcus. "What else does the board tell us?" Marcus pointed to several other pieces, explaining how each represented a different aspect of General Wei's strategy. The rook symbolized strong foundations, the need to make any new trade agreements beneficial for all parties involved so they would last. The bishop represented the church and social institutions, which General Wei had used to spread the message that his kingdom was trustworthy and honorable in its dealings. As dawn broke over the palace, Marcus and King Edward were still hunched over the ancient chessboard, translating 500-year-old wisdom into modern action. The hidden move was being revealed piece by piece, and with it, hope was being restored to a kingdom that had nearly given up. News of Marcus's elevation to chief strategic advisor spread through the palace like wildfire. The reaction was immediate and divided. Some of the servants whispered excitedly about the guard who had finally been noticed. Others, particularly among the nobles and established advisors, reacted with outrage and disbelief. Lord Pemberton, the king's chief military advisor for the past 15 years, burst into the strategy room 3 hours after Marcus's meeting with the king. His face was purple with rage, and his expensive robes swished dramatically as he stormed toward the desk where Marcus and King Edward were working.
"Your Majesty," Lord Pemberton sputtered.
"Surely you cannot be serious about this madness. A guard. A common guard with no education, no experience, and no understanding of diplomatic protocol is now making decisions that affect the entire kingdom." King Edward looked up calmly from the maps and documents spread before them. "Lord Pemberton, I understand your concern, but I suggest you listen to what Marcus has to say before you judge." "I will not listen to anything from someone who has been holding a spear for 12 years, Pemberton snapped. "This is an insult to every qualified advisor in the palace. We have been working day and night to find a solution, and you replace us with this descendant of the man who saved Aldoria 5 centuries ago," King Edward finished firmly. "The man whose strategy you yourself have studied and praised in your military reports. Or have you forgotten that you once wrote an entire treatise on the genius of General Wei Chen?" Pemberton's mouth opened and closed like a fish. "That is different. General Wei was clearly a man of noble character who was reduced to a common guard by jealous nobles who could not accept that greatness could come from someone outside their circles," Marcus said quietly, "just as you cannot accept it now." The room fell silent. Several other advisors who had entered behind Lord Pemberton shifted uncomfortably. They had all come ready to protest, but Marcus's calm words hit harder than any angry response could have. Eleanor, the king's secretary, stepped forward with a thick folder of documents. "Gentlemen, perhaps your time would be better spent reviewing these findings, rather than arguing about who should or should not be at this table. We have 5 days remaining, and this information is crucial." She spread the documents across a second table. "I have compiled a complete analysis of the Crimson Trading Company and all their major competitors. The picture is quite fascinating." Despite their resentment, the advisors could not resist the lure of information. They gathered around the table, and Eleanor began her presentation. "The Crimson Trading Company currently controls 70% of Valthor's maritime commerce. But their monopoly is not as secure as everyone believes. In the past 5 years, 3 smaller companies have been systematically driven out of business through aggressive tactics that many consider unethical." Marcus joined them at the table, pointing to specific entries in the reports. "These 3 companies, the Silver Fleet Consortium, the Eastern Star Merchants, and the Blue Horizon Trading House, were all founded by former Crimson Company executives who left due to disagreements about business practices. They have the knowledge, the connections, and the motivation to challenge Crimson's dominance. They just lack the opportunity and support." Lord Pemberton frowned at the documents, his anger slowly being replaced by grudging interest. "You are suggesting we fund these competing companies?" "Not fund them," Marcus corrected. "Empower them. We offer them exclusive access to our southern shipping lanes, which is the very thing the Crimson Company wants. But instead of giving them a monopoly, we create a competitive marketplace. Any company that meets certain ethical standards and fair trade practices can use our ports. This immediately breaks Crimson's stranglehold on the region." Another advisor, Lady Catherine, who specialized in diplomatic relations, spoke up. "But won't this provoke Valthor even more?" "They could see it as an act of economic warfare." "It could," King Edward agreed. "Which is why we do not present it as warfare at all. We present it as an initiative for regional prosperity. We invite companies from Valthor and surrounding kingdoms to participate in a new open trade alliance. We make it about opportunity for everyone, not punishment for anyone specific." Marcus added, "General Wei's strategy worked because he never made it about confrontation. He made it about creating something better than what existed before. The old system collapsed, not because he destroyed it, but because people chose the new system voluntarily. Over the next several hours, the group worked to refine the plan. Even Lord Pemberton, despite his initial resistance, began contributing ideas. His knowledge of military logistics proved useful in planning how to secure and manage the ports. Lady Catherine's diplomatic expertise helped craft the language of the proposals to be sent to various trading companies. Other advisors brought their own specialized knowledge to the table. Marcus watched this transformation with quiet satisfaction. This was what General Wei had understood 5 centuries ago. The same lessons still written into the arrangement of pieces on the ancient chessboard. Success was not about one brilliant person making all the decisions. It was about creating a structure where everyone's talents could contribute to a larger goal. As evening approached, Eleanor returned with more information. Your Majesty, I have made discreet contact with representatives from the Silver Fleet Consortium. They are very interested in meeting to discuss opportunities. However, they are cautious. They have been burned by the Crimson Company before, and they worry this might be some kind of trap. Then we meet them in neutral territory, King Edward decided, somewhere they feel safe to speak freely. Marcus, you will accompany Lady Catherine to this meeting. Your knowledge of General Wei's principles will be essential in building trust. The next morning, Marcus found himself in a carriage with Lady Catherine, traveling to the port city of Harborview, where the meeting with Silver Fleet representatives would take place. It was his first time leaving the palace in his role as advisor, and the change in how people treated him was startling. Suddenly, guards saluted him as an equal. Servants addressed him with respect. Citizens who saw the royal carriage whispered and pointed, wondering who the important passenger was. Lady Catherine noticed his discomfort. It takes some getting used to, she said kindly. Being noticed after years of being invisible. I'm not sure I like it, Marcus admitted. As a guard, I could observe everything without people changing their behavior. Now everyone is watching me. That is the price of influence, Lady Catherine replied. But it is also the opportunity. You can do more good in one day as an advisor than you could in a lifetime as a guard. The meeting took place in a private room at a reputable inn. 3 representatives from the Silver Fleet Consortium arrived, looking nervous and suspicious. They were all experienced merchants. People who had learned to trust nothing and no one in the cutthroat world of maritime trade. Marcus let Lady Catherine handle the initial pleasantries and formal introductions. Then he spoke, choosing his words carefully. Gentlemen, I understand your caution. You have been betrayed before, and you have every reason to doubt that this opportunity is genuine. So let me be completely transparent about what we are offering and why. For the next hour, Marcus explained not just the practical details of the trade proposal, but the philosophy behind it. He spoke of General Wei's strategy, of how lasting success came from creating systems that benefited everyone rather than schemes that enriched a few at the expense of many. He acknowledged the risks they would be taking and did not pretend those risks did not exist. One of the Silver Fleet representatives, a grizzled merchant named Captain Torres, listened intently. Finally, he spoke. I've been in this business for 40 years, and I've heard every pitch, every promise, and every lie that exists. But you are talking about something different. You are not asking us to trust you. You are asking us to trust a principle. And you are putting your kingdom's reputation behind that principle. Exactly, Marcus confirmed. If we betray these principles, we do not just lose your business. We lose credibility with every trading partner in the region. Our kingdom cannot afford that. So we are building in accountability from the start. Any company that uses our ports will be subject to the same rules and standards, including our own royal merchant fleet. The 3 representatives exchanged glances. Years of working together had taught them to communicate without words. Finally, Captain Torres extended his hand. We will bring this proposal to our full board of directors. But speaking personally, this is the most honest offer I have heard in my entire career. If your king truly stands behind these principles, I believe we can build something remarkable. As Marcus and Lady Catherine rode back to the palace that evening, she smiled at him. You did well today. Very well. You earned their respect not by trying to impress them, but by showing them genuine respect first. Marcus looked out at the countryside passing by. This is just the beginning. Getting one company interested is not enough. We need to create momentum, and we only have 3 days left before Valthor's ultimatum expires. The palace became a whirlwind of activity over the next 48 hours. Messengers rode out at all hours carrying sealed proposals to trading companies across the region. Eleanor coordinated meetings with representatives from various merchant guilds. The royal lawyers worked day and night drafting agreements that would establish the new trade alliance framework. And through it all, Marcus stood at the center, consulting the ancient chessboard whenever difficult decisions arose. But not everyone was pleased with the progress. On the third day before the ultimatum deadline, Marcus received an urgent message to meet Lady Catherine in her private office. When he arrived, her face was pale with worry. "We have a problem," she said, without preamble. "The Crimson Trading Company has learned what we are doing. They have sent a representative to speak with King Edward, and they are threatening severe consequences if we continue with this plan." Marcus felt his stomach tighten. What kind of consequences? "They are claiming that our actions constitute economic aggression against Valthor. They have convinced several members of Valthor's parliament that Aldoria is trying to destroy their economy. The ultimatum is no longer just about territory. They are now threatening immediate military action if we do not cease all negotiations with competing trade companies." This was exactly what Marcus had feared. General Wei's strategy had worked 5 centuries ago, partly because communication was slower. News traveled by horse and ship, giving him time to establish agreements before opposition could organize. But in the modern world, information spread instantly. The Crimson Company had spies everywhere, and they had reacted faster than Marcus had anticipated. "I need to see the king immediately," Marcus said, in the strategy room. King Edward was already in a heated discussion with Lord Pemberton and several other advisors. The Crimson Company's representative, a cold-eyed woman named Madame Vex, sat in a chair looking supremely confident. "Your Majesty," Madame Vex was saying, "you are playing a very dangerous game. The Crimson Trading Company employs over 50,000 people across 6 kingdoms. We control supply chains for food, medicine, and essential goods. If you force us to respond to your aggressive actions, innocent people will suffer. Are you prepared to have that blood on your hands?" King Edward's jaw was tight with anger, but before he could respond, Marcus stepped forward. "Madame Vex, I do not believe we have been introduced. I am Marcus Chen, Chief Strategic Advisor to His Majesty." Madame Vex looked him up and down with obvious disdain. "Ah, yes, the famous guard who thinks he understands trade and politics. How charming." Marcus ignored the insult. "I am curious about something. You claim that our trade initiative is aggressive and harmful. Yet we have proposed an open system where any company, including the Crimson Trading Company, can participate equally. How is offering equal opportunity to all aggressive toward anyone?" Madame Vex's smile was razor-sharp. "Do not play word games with me, boy. Everyone knows this is designed to undermine our market position. You are specifically courting companies that have grudges against us. We are courting companies that were driven out of business by unfair practices," Marcus corrected. "There is a difference. If the Crimson Company cannot compete in a fair marketplace, perhaps the problem is not with our initiative, but with your business model." "How dare you," Madame Vex hissed, rising from her chair. "The Crimson Trading Company has built its success through decades of hard work and smart decisions. And by buying politicians," Marcus said quietly. "And by using your control of shipping lanes to charge whatever prices you want, and by destroying any competitor through practices that most people would consider blackmail and sabotage. These are not secrets, Madame Vex. Everyone in the trade community knows how your company operates. They are simply too afraid to speak openly about it." The room fell silent. Even Lord Pemberton looked shocked at Marcus's direct confrontation. Madame Vex's face had gone from confident to furious. "You will regret this," she said coldly. "I came here to offer your kingdom a chance to step back from disaster. Instead, you have chosen to insult me and my company."
"Very well."
"Valthor's military will receive new instructions within the hour. I hope you are ready for war, because you have just guaranteed it." She swept from the room, her expensive gown trailing behind her like a threat. Lord Pemberton immediately turned on Marcus. You fool. You just ruined everything. She came here willing to negotiate, and you antagonized her deliberately. But King Edward held up his hand. Marcus, explain yourself. That was a significant risk you just took. Marcus walked to the ancient chessboard and placed his hand on one of the pawns. Your Majesty, do you see this piece? It is the weakest piece on the board, the one everyone overlooks. But in General Wei's strategy, the pawns played a crucial role. Do you know what that role was? The king shook his head. They forced the opponent to reveal their true intentions, Marcus explained. By pushing forward in unexpected ways, the pawns made the enemy show their hand. Madame Vex came here pretending to negotiate, but she had no intention of compromising. She wanted to intimidate us into abandoning our plan. So I gave her what she wanted, a reason to drop her pretense and show her true colors. And now we face war, Lord Pemberton said bitterly. No, Marcus replied. Now we face a bluff. Think about what Madame Vex said. She claimed the Crimson Company employs 50,000 people and controls essential supply chains. If Valthor goes to war, all of those operations shut down. The company loses millions every day. The people of Valthor lose access to food and medicine. And for what? To gain territory that they could simply buy access to through peaceful trade? King Edward's eyes lit up with understanding. The Crimson Company's threat is hollow. They need peace, even more than we do. Exactly, Marcus confirmed. But more importantly, her visit tells us something crucial. The Silver Fleet Consortium and the other companies we have been negotiating with must have gone public with our offers. The Crimson Company would not have reacted so strongly if they did not see this as a genuine threat to their monopoly. That means our strategy is working. Lady Catherine entered the room, slightly out of breath from running. Your Majesty, I have news. The Eastern Star merchants have just announced they are signing our trade agreement. They made the announcement in the main commercial district of Valthor's capital city. Apparently, the crowd cheered. The people of Valthor are celebrating because they believe this will lower prices and create jobs. A smile spread across King Edward's face. The people are on our side. Ow. Over the next several hours, more news arrived. The Blue Horizon Trading House had also signed the agreement. 3 smaller companies from neighboring kingdoms had requested information about joining the alliance. Most significantly, protests had begun in Valthor's capital, with citizens demanding that their government abandon the ultimatum and embrace the new trade opportunities instead. Marcus stood by the window, watching the sun set over the palace gardens. He thought about his grandfather, who had kept the family secret for so many years. He thought about General Wei Chen, whose brilliant strategy had been forgotten and stolen by those who could not appreciate genius in a common man. And he thought about how sometimes the greatest victories came not from military might, but from understanding what people truly needed. Eleanor approached him quietly. You look troubled for someone who just prevented a war. The war is not prevented yet, Marcus replied. Madame Vex will not give up easily. The Crimson Company has too much power and too much to lose. They will try something else, something we have not anticipated. Then we will face it when it comes, Eleanor said. But for now, you should rest. You have barely slept in 3 days. Marcus nodded but did not move from the window. Tomorrow was the day before the ultimatum deadline. Whatever the Crimson Company was planning, it would come soon. And he needed to be ready, in the ancient texts that his grandfather had passed down. There was a phrase that General Wei had written, the greatest battles are won before the first sword is drawn. But the greatest challenge comes when victory is within reach. That is when desperation makes enemies most dangerous. Marcus had a feeling he was about to learn exactly what that meant. Marcus woke to urgent pounding on his door. He had finally fallen asleep just 2 hours earlier, exhausted from days of constant planning and negotiation. Now, as gray dawn light filtered through his window, he knew immediately that something had gone terribly wrong. Lord Pemberton stood in the hallway, and for once, there was no hostility in his expression, only fear. You need to come quickly. The Crimson Company has made their move. In the strategy room, chaos reigned. Advisors shouted over each other while King Edward stood at the window, his face carved from stone. Lady Catherine saw Marcus enter and rushed to him. "They arrested Captain Torres and the other Silver Fleet representatives," she said, her voice shaking. "The Crimson Company used their influence with Valthor's courts to charge them with conspiracy to commit economic treason. It is a new law they apparently pushed through Parliament 3 months ago, anticipating exactly this kind of situation." Marcus felt ice in his veins. "Where are they being held?" "In Valthor's capital prison. The trial is set for tomorrow, the same day as the ultimatum deadline. If they are convicted, the penalty is execution. And with the judges all in the Crimson Company's pocket, conviction is certain." King Edward turned from the window. "This is my fault? I should have anticipated they would resort to legal persecution. We cannot let innocent people die because of our strategy. We also cannot abandon the strategy," Lord Pemberton said, surprising everyone. "If we back down now, the Crimson Company wins completely. They will have proven they can terrorize anyone who opposes them. No company will dare work with us again." Marcus walked to the ancient chessboard, studying it intently. His mind raced through everything his grandfather had taught him about General Way's principles. There had to be an answer here, some insight that could help them navigate this crisis. Then he saw it. A pattern in the placement of pieces that he had overlooked before. The white bishop positioned in a way that seemed defensive, but was actually something else entirely. "Your Majesty," Marcus said slowly, "in General Way's time, there was a similar situation. One of his key allies was arrested on false charges by the enemy's government. Everyone thought it would destroy his entire strategy." "What did he do?" King Edward asked. "He used the trial itself as his weapon. Instead of trying to hide what he was doing, he made sure everyone knew about it. He turned the courtroom into a stage where the truth about his opponent's corruption was exposed for all to see." Lady Catherine shook her head. "But we cannot get into that courtroom. Valthor's government will not allow foreign observers at a treason trial." "Then we do not go to the courtroom," Marcus replied, an idea forming. "We bring the courtroom to the people. Eleanor, do we have any connections with newspaper publishers in Valthor?" Eleanor thought for a moment. "Yes, there is a publisher named Henrik Moller who once did business with the royal family. He has no love for the Crimson Company. They destroyed his shipping business 15 years ago. Contact him immediately," Marcus instructed. "Offer him the exclusive story of everything that has happened. The trade agreements, the Crimson Company's threats, the false charges against Captain Torres. Give him documentation of every corrupt practice the Crimson Company has engaged in over the past 2 decades. Make sure he understands that this is the story that will define his career." King Edward caught on immediately. If the story is published before the trial, public opinion will be on Captain Torres' side. The judges may be corrupt, but they still have to live in the community. They cannot ignore massive public pressure. "But there is more," Marcus continued, his excitement building. "We do not just send the story to one newspaper. We send it to every independent publisher in the region. We make this about more than just Aldoria versus Valthor. We make it about honest merchants everywhere versus a corrupt monopoly that has been strangling trade for decades." Over the next 12 hours, the palace became a hub of furious activity. Eleanor coordinated with publishers across 6 kingdoms. The royal archivists pulled records of the Crimson Company's questionable business practices. Lawyers prepared detailed explanations of why the economic treason law was being misused. And Marcus worked with former Crimson Company employees who had left in disgust, documenting their stories of corruption and intimidation. By evening, the first stories began appearing in newspapers across the region. Henrik Moller's publication in Valthor led with a powerful headline, "The Trial That Will Decide." If honesty still matters in business? The article laid out everything in careful detail, painting Captain Torres not as a criminal, but as a hero standing up against systematic corruption. But the Crimson Company was not finished fighting. Madame Vex appeared again at the palace, this time with a squad of Valthor's soldiers behind her. Her face was twisted with rage. "You think you are clever," she spat at Marcus. "You think publishing lies in newspapers will save you? But I have convinced Valthor's prime minister that your kingdom is engaged in an active propaganda campaign against our nation. the ultimatum has been moved up. You have until midnight tonight to surrender the territory, or our armies march at dawn." King Edward stood firm. "We will not surrender to threats and false charges. If Valthor chooses war over peace, that choice is yours to make." Madame Vex smiled cruelly. "I hope you are prepared to explain to your citizens why their homes will burn because you sided with criminals over legitimate business interests." After she left, the strategy room fell into grim silence. They had hours, not days. The chess match had reached its critical moment, and Marcus was not sure they had played the right moves. Then a messenger burst into the room, so excited he could barely speak. "Your Majesty, you need to see what is happening in Valthor's capital." He unfurled a long sheet of paper covered in hastily written notes. "Protests have broken out all across the city. Thousands of people are marching to the Parliament building demanding that the government cancel the ultimatum. They are carrying copies of the newspaper articles. They are chanting that they would rather have honest trade than territory gained through dishonest means." More messengers arrived in quick succession, each bringing similar reports from different cities. The story had spread faster than anyone had anticipated, and the public response was overwhelming. People were not just supporting Captain Torres. They were rising up against the entire system of corruption that the Crimson Company represented. Marcus watched the reports pile up on the table, and a thought struck him. This is what General Wei understood. He did not win because he was smarter than his enemies. He won because he trusted that when people are given the truth and the choice, most of them will choose what is right. At 10 o'clock that evening, 2 hours before the ultimatum deadline, an official delegation from Valthar's parliament arrived at the palace. They looked exhausted and somewhat embarrassed. Their spokesman, a gray-haired woman named Senator Blackwood, addressed King Edward formally. "Your Majesty, the Parliament of Valthor has voted to withdraw the ultimatum. We are also launching an investigation into the Crimson Trading Company's business practices and political influence. The charges against Captain Torres and his colleagues have been dropped, and they are being released from custody immediately." King Edward maintained his diplomatic composure, but Marcus could see the relief in his eyes. "Senator, I am pleased that wisdom has prevailed. Aldoria has never sought conflict with Valthor. We seek only fair and honest trade that benefits all our peoples." Senator Blackwood nodded. "We understand that now. The Prime Minister has been placed on temporary leave, pending investigation of his connections to the Crimson Company. Parliament will be forming a new government that is committed to rooting out corruption and building genuine partnerships with neighboring kingdoms." After the delegation left, the strategy room erupted in celebration. Advisors who had doubted Marcus now clapped him on the back. Eleanor was crying with relief. Even Lord Pemberton shook Marcus's hand with genuine respect, but King Edward pulled Marcus aside away from the celebration. "You saved the kingdom without spilling a drop of blood. You proved that General Wei's strategy still works even in our modern world. But I have a question. If the newspapers had not spread the story in time, if the public had not reacted so strongly, what would we have done?" Marcus looked at the ancient chessboard, still sitting where it had throughout this entire crisis. "Honestly, Your Majesty, I do not know. General Wei's texts speak of having backup plans, but they also speak of something else. Sometimes you have to trust that when you do the right thing the right way, the universe will find a way to support it." The king smiled. "That is either very wise or very naive." "Perhaps it is both," Marcus replied. "But it worked." 3 months had passed since the crisis ended, and the world had changed in ways both small and profound. The new trade alliance was thriving beyond anyone's expectations. Ships from dozens of companies now filled Aldoria's ports, bringing prosperity to regions that had struggled for years. The Silver Fleet Consortium had grown into one of the largest trading operations in the region, and Captain Torres had become something of a folk hero among merchants. But the biggest changes were perhaps the most personal ones. Marcus stood in the grand hall of the palace, wearing formal robes that still felt strange on his shoulders. He had been officially granted the title of Duke Chen, restoring his family's noble status for the first time in 5 centuries. The king had also established the Chen Institute of Strategic Studies, dedicated to teaching General Wei's principles to future generations. Yet despite all these honors, Marcus often found himself missing the simplicity of being a guard. He missed the quiet hours standing at his post, observing and thinking without the weight of everyone's expectations on his shoulders. Today was special, though. Today, the ancient chessboard was being moved to a new location. It would be the centerpiece of the Chen Institute, where students could study it and learn from its wisdom. Marcus had requested permission to accompany it. On this final journey through the palace, as workers carefully lifted the board, something unexpected happened. One of the wooden panels at the base of the board shifted slightly, revealing a hidden compartment that no one had known existed. Marcus's heart raced as he reached into the compartment. Inside was a sealed letter, the paper yellowed with age but still intact. The seal bore the mark of General Wei Chen. With trembling hands, Marcus broke the seal and unfolded the letter. The handwriting was elegant but faded, written in an old style that took him a moment to decipher. As he read, tears began to stream down his face. The letter was addressed to the descendant who solves the puzzle. General Wei had known that someday, centuries in the future, someone from his bloodline would rediscover his strategy and use it to save the kingdom again. The letter contained his final thoughts. Wisdom he had not been able to share during his own lifetime because of the jealousy and small-mindedness of those around him. But it was the ending of the letter that struck Marcus most deeply. If you are reading this, General Wei had written, then you have already learned the most important lesson. The hidden move on the chessboard was never about chess at all. It was about understanding that true power comes not from forcing others to submit, but from creating systems where everyone can succeed. The nobles of my time could not understand this. They saw power as something to be hoarded and protected. But you, my distant heir, have proven that the future can be wiser than the past. Do not let anyone make you believe that your value comes from your title or position. Your value comes from your willingness to serve something larger than yourself. The kingdom is fortunate to have you, but remember to stay humble. The moment you begin to believe you are special is the moment you stop being useful. Marcus folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the hidden compartment. He would share its contents with the Institute later, but for now, he wanted to hold this moment privately. A final conversation across the centuries with the ancestor he had never met but had come to know so well. That evening, there was a celebration at the palace to mark the opening of the Chen Institute. Nobles and merchants, diplomats and scholars, all gathered to honor the man who had saved the kingdom. Marcus gave a speech that many would remember for years, but it was not filled with pride or boasting. Instead, he spoke about the countless unnamed people throughout history who had done important things without recognition. The guards and servants and ordinary citizens who kept kingdoms running while powerful people took credit for their work. My ancestor, General Wei Chen, was one of these people, Marcus said to the assembled crowd. He saved Eldoria with nothing but his mind and his principles, and his reward was to be forgotten. I am grateful that his story has been remembered at last, but I want to honor all the forgotten heroes as well. The servants who work while we sleep, the farmers who grow our food, the teachers who shape young minds. These are the true guardians of civilization. After his speech, Lady Catherine approached him with a smile. That was beautifully said. You have a gift for speaking truth in ways that make people listen. I learned it from being invisible for 12 years, Marcus replied. When people do not notice you, you learn to see them clearly. You see their strengths and weaknesses, their fears and hopes. You see what motivates them and what holds them back. That invisibility was the greatest education I could have received. Captain Torres, who had traveled from the coast for the celebration, joined them. I have been thinking about writing a book on what happened, he said. The true story of how one man's courage and wisdom prevented a war. Would you help me with it? Marcus hesitated. I would prefer if the book focused on the principles rather than the person. What we did worked because we trusted in ideas that are bigger than any individual. If people learn about me, but not about those ideas, then we have taught them the wrong lesson. The old captain laughed. Spoken like a true student of General Wei? Very well, we will write about the principles. But we will also tell your story, because sometimes people need to see principles in action to understand them. As the celebration continued, Marcus slipped away to visit his old post outside the library. The guard standing there now, a young man named Thomas, straightened nervously when he saw the newly minted Duke approaching. "Relax," Marcus said with a smile. "I am not here to inspect you. I just wanted to stand here one more time and remember what it was like." Thomas looked confused, but remained silent, as guards were trained to do. Marcus stood in his old position, feeling the familiar weight of stillness and observation. From here, he had watched the kingdom's business for 12 years, learning and preparing without anyone knowing. From here, he had made the decision to knock on that door and change everything. "Never underestimate the power of your position," Marcus said to Thomas. "You may think you are just standing here holding a spear, but you are seeing things that people in power never see. You are learning lessons they will never learn. Someday, that knowledge may be exactly what the kingdom needs. So watch carefully, think deeply, and be ready." Thomas nodded, still looking uncertain about why a duke would be giving advice to a common guard. But Marcus could see the spark of intelligence in the young man's eyes, the hint of ambition carefully hidden behind the mask of obedience. Perhaps Thomas would be another hidden piece on the chessboard waiting for his moment to move. Marcus returned to the celebration and found King Edward standing alone on a balcony, looking out over the city. The king gestured for Marcus to join him. "I have been thinking," King Edward said, "about how close we came to disaster. If you had not knocked on that door, if you had stayed silent out of fear or protocol, where would we be now?" "Someone else would have found a solution," Marcus replied. "I do not believe in single points of failure. If I had not acted, another opportunity would have presented itself. The universe has a way of solving problems when enough people want them solved," perhaps the king said. "Or perhaps you are being modest. But I want to ask you something. Now that you have wealth, status, and influence, what will you do with them? What is your hidden move now?" Marcus thought about the question carefully. He looked out at the city, at the thousands of lights representing thousands of lives. He thought about his grandfather and general, Wei, and all the forgotten heroes throughout history who had done important things without recognition. "I think," he said slowly, "my next move is to help other people discover their own hidden moves, to teach them that greatness does not require titles or positions, to show them that anyone from any background can change the world if they have wisdom and courage. That is what the Institute is for. Not to glorify one strategy or one family, but to remind everyone that they have power they do not yet know about." King Edward smiled. "A fine answer, and a fitting continuation of your ancestors' legacy." As the celebration wound down and guests began to depart, Marcus took one last look at the ancient chessboard, now resting in its new home at the Institute. The pieces stood in their eternal positions, holding secrets that had saved a kingdom twice and would perhaps save it again in the distant future. But Marcus knew now that the real secret was not hidden in the board at all. It was hidden in every person who had ever been overlooked, underestimated, or forgotten. In the guards standing at their posts watching and learning, in the servants moving through hallways, seeing everything, in the ordinary citizens trying to live good lives despite the chaos created by those in power. The hidden move was not a strategy or a tactic. It was the simple truth that everyone matters, everyone has value, and everyone has the potential to change the world. You just have to believe it, trust it, and have the courage to act when your moment comes. Marcus walked home through the quiet streets of the capital, no longer invisible, but no longer needing to be. He had played his part in the great game, and the kingdom was better for it. Now it was time for others to discover their own hidden moves, their own moments of courage, their own chances to prove that wisdom and integrity could still triumph over power and corruption. The chessboard had taught its lesson once again. And somewhere in the kingdom, perhaps in a palace, or a shop, or a quiet home, another person was learning to see the world differently, preparing for the moment when they too would make their hidden move and change everything. The game was never really over. It just kept finding new players,